Well, greetings, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and start the webinar. I just want to welcome you to today's webinar series. My name is Denisha Price, and I'm currently a Chapter Activities Coordinator here at American Concrete Institute. Today, we have Kimberly Kaler, who will be our speaker. She is the current president of AOE, Advancing Organizational Excellence. With almost 25 years of serving technical industries in an organizational strategy and marketing role, Kimberly leads the AOE team and their service offerings. Her experience as an owner of a marketing agency for 16 years, as well as several years in a corporate communications and business development for nationally ranked engineering firm, provide her with the perfect mix of industry and consulting experience to meet the needs of AOE clients. In her role at AOE, she ensures that best practices are applied to the delivery of all services, the establishment and monitoring of return on investment, as well as service and talent development. Please join me in welcoming our speaker, and now she'll begin today's webinar presentation.
Wonderful, Denisha. Thank you so much. I appreciate you all joining today. My background with ACI is I'm a former ACI committee chair lead, as well as a former member of the board of direction and former chapter member. I currently live somewhere that does not have a chapter, but I want to just stress that, I know that you are showing up today as a member of an ACI chapter and looking for tips and tools that will help you in your volunteer roles and then maybe in your own professional career goals as well. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is sustainability. And I'm sure this is something that you've seen a ton of presentations on recently. My role here today is not to talk to you about carbon neutrality requirements. If you haven't already gone to a session completed by New, I invite you to do that. ACI Center for Excellence for Carbon Neutral Concrete. A lot of great resources there. What I'm really going to talk to you about is the importance of communicating it. And we're also going to talk about DEI. Believe it or not, there's a big intersection that we're seeing. So I'm going to, try and mold them two together for you as chapter leaders and how the two intersect. So when we do talk about sustainability, you're also going to hear me mention resiliency quite a bit. This is probably something that's showing up in your day-to-day life, whatever your profession is as well. Just for the sake of us all using the same terminology here, I have a definition that Andrea Shocker actually suggests to use. She is, of course, with New ACI Center for Carbon Neutral Concrete, meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So keep that in mind when we're talking about sustainability today. That's what we're talking about. And I think the important thing is oftentimes when we think of sustainability or we think of things related to the environment, it's that we think of things in terms of the environment, but there's a societal aspect of sustainability, and that's where we're seeing the intersection with diversity, equity, and inclusion as well. That people perspective fits into the society part and the economy part, and I'll help build on those concepts. So sustainability and resiliency, what do we do? There's a lot of information out there. Maybe as chapter volunteers, you've even been asked to have a DEI policy or cover DEI in terms of, programming. But it's very complex. There's all sorts of varying levels of understanding in all of these topics. So we'll dive into them a little bit more. In terms of sustainability communications, I'm referring to the act of consciously integrating sustainability into a communication strategy about an organization's sustainability and goals and efforts. And AOE is a fully owned subsidiary of the American Concrete Institute, and we are actually hired quite a bit right now to help organizations with their sustainable communications efforts. So, a cement company, a contractor that is being asked to actually share their messaging in terms of what they're doing from a sustainable perspective. And again, the DEI part comes into it too, so we'll talk more about that. The goal is really to create an understanding and to help build trust. So you may ask, why bother? Why are we even, worried about this entire topic? Well, first, the sustainability is a key value of millennials. And my guess, if I had you all on screen here right now, and if I asked how many of you are looking for new young members to join your group? How many of you are having all sorts of discussions about how do we get the younger generation to show up at our meetings? How do we get them to participate? How do we get them to volunteer? Well, one way is to really understand what makes the millennial generation tick, and things that do matter to them do relate to DEI as well as sustainability. So sustainability goals lead to increased engagement and higher retention rates. So that's really important as well, to make sure that we understand the key elements in terms of the audiences that we're talking about. The other thing is there's been a huge shift since the pandemic in terms of consumer choice. So if you just think now, over the last couple of years, there's been a real shift in terms of the general public and the voice that the general public believes that they have, and in many cases does have, in terms of how associations, how organizations make choices and what those choices are. So it used to be that you kept societal issues, you kept political issues, you kept, anything that can be even controversial was kept out of the limelight in terms of business or nonprofits. Well, now 60% choose brands based on societal issues. We know there's a cancel mentality, if you will. And then 67% report they have the power to force change. So keep that in mind too. It's different. If a potential member doesn't like what you're doing, chances are they won't show up. That's how they're voting, if you will, which could be different than how it was generations of the past in terms of, maybe somebody did get mad and maybe somebody did leave, but there's a different mindset in terms of consumers and the choice and the viewpoint that they have. So that's really key to understand as well. And then in terms of awareness and push for reporting, so this applies to both diversity, equity, inclusion, and sustainability. We are hearing from the contractors, engineers, architects that we work with that they're being asked to comment on these topics and these very important topics. So requests for sustainable and DEI metrics are showing up in RFPs. I had a conversation with an engineer about a week ago, and they were told by a big healthcare institution that they do a lot of work with not to even bother responding, even though they're the ones that usually get the work, not to bother responding unless they had a diversity, equity, inclusion policy and they could show some metrics. I've heard the same things related to sustainability. So these are the things that are actually your members are having to face. Your members are need to actually be able to address these. Environmental product declarations, EPDs, are being recommended and showing up in many states, in the DOTs, by GSA. So that's impacting us all as well. ESG, environmental, social, and governance. This has made the news quite a bit lately because there has been a move by some politicians actually to try and strike ESG in terms of how financial decisions are made. And obviously, I'm not going to comment on anything one political party or another, but just know that ESG is a topic of conversation. There's also many other big owners that are looking at ESG reports from their contractors, from their engineers, from their architects when they're purchasing those services. So that's something that's also impacting ACI chapter members. When they come to the ACI meeting, but then they come back and they need to be able to report on all of these things. And then increasing requests to track supplier diversity is something that that many are also facing. So why a company or an organization should communicate about sustainability? Obviously to inform and to involve different stakeholders and share what you're doing. It does give you a differentiation, a competitive advantage. Helps your reputation. Again, we talked about this next generation. Workforce development is key. I've been in the concrete industry for 25 years, and every single day of my 25-year tenure in the concrete industry, workforce development has come up as an issue, and I'm sure you can all relate and have your own stories to tell. And then also it does pay. We do know that in terms of investment, those that are sustainable, those that are able to communicate related to their diversity, equity, inclusion goals, it does pay off in terms of profit, revenue, employee engagement, etc. However, with all of that is the big setup that I had for you here. It's a very difficult thing to do. So there's a lot of misinformation, mistrust, lack of immediate benefits. We all know that just even how you define sustainability. There's so many misconceptions about what diversity, equity, and inclusion is as well. All of that makes it very, very complicated to put programs together, and then from there to actually communicate them as well. Another reason sustainability communications is so hard, justified mistrust. There are people out there that greenwash, or organizations, I should say, widespread misinformation and misunderstandings, and then it does require change. So again, going back to consumers and the power that they have now, that they wield in terms of choice, you really have to walk the walk and talk the talk. You can't claim you're environmentally friendly and then showcase examples in real life where you really aren't. It's some of the examples related to that, and obviously environmental and sustainability isn't just related to trees, but you wouldn't want to proclaim to the world that you are very conscious and sustainable, but you killed 1 million trees to actually print that to pass it out. So very sophomoric and simple example, but again, looking at the things, that the messages that you put out and making sure that they're consistent with what your actions are as well. Sustainability is also, it's not an opinion. It needs to be based on truth and science, and that's where ACI can help, especially with new and the Center for Carbon Neutral Concrete, some of the ACI committees and other things that are happening, and resources. So you do have resources within ACI to help you with that. And then to have a positive impact is very, very hard. So all of these factors make this a very complicated topic, not only to tackle, but then again, I'm talking about the communication standpoint. How do you communicate it from there too? What else is rolled up into this? You've heard me mention several times DE&I, diversity, equity, inclusion. It's different, yet it's related, and we see it showing up in a lot of proposals as the people equation with regard to sustainability. So sustainability, resiliency, longevity, what's the people factor in all of that? Culture, employee health and wellness, governance, code of ethics, risk management, safety, labor, and human rights. So all these different things are lumped into the factors impacting our membership right now. Thought I'd share just a sample ESG. So those of you that maybe don't have any experience in seeing them, I guess if anybody's on the call from a cement company, it's pretty typical formatting and reporting that you've likely had to do, but these are the types of things that are actually in an ESG. So sustainability, greenhouse gas emissions, water consumption, safety, diversity, equity, inclusion. So again, we're seeing that roll up in ESG. Employee health and wellness, crisis response, community service, philanthropy, leadership, ethics, compliance, risk management. So whether you agree with these things or don't agree with them, etc., the important message that I'd like you to take away is that there are many owners asking for those of us in the industry to report, whether it's in a formal ESG fashion or again, commenting in a request for proposals on some of these different factors, if not all of them. The other thing is the formula for success. So we've talked about, in order to communicate sustainability, you must do sustainability. And how you talk about it is really key. This graphic I show here actually is from FHWA in terms of where their roadmap is. And I like to share it because it's not simply just the climate and sustainability part, but you see the equity part of it that's showing up once again: transformation, organizational excellence, safety, and then the economic strength. So another thing that's really key in terms of longevity, resiliency, is that economic factor too. So for example, these roads that we are designing, are they creating greater stability for disadvantaged populations? We know, when lessons learned from the 70s, that we actually divided up communities, and we created all sorts of challenges related to that. So what can we do in this profession when we're talking about sustainability and resiliency, and what that equity piece part of it is too, in terms of people? So getting started. A declaration of intent is the first thing that you're doing. So whether or not that's something that comes from your chapter, maybe it's something that you're watching this webinar today and you take it away as something that you want to do in your own organization. But a declaration of intent in terms of what your sustainability goals are. And I'll refer to things in terms of sustainability. It may also be your DEI program that rolls up into it. Need to avoid any greenwashing, make sure you substantiate any claims, and then providing updates. So I want to, for example, here, if you declare your production facility is going to be carbon neutral by 2030, need to provide an update for that. You don't just announce it once and go away from it. You continue to provide updates. I think we have a lot of examples right now. I think, Delta, for example, had announced, I think that they're going to have a carbon neutral footprint by, I think it's 2050. It could be wrong, remembering that wrong, but they are already providing updates when I sit down in the seat and I see what Delta is actually sharing in terms of their sustainability and what their efforts are related to that. And their equity piece actually flows into that as well. So you don't have to have all the answers either. These are big topics, really big topics, and they require a lot of planning, and then a lot of an ability to be very nimble and agile and actually make corrections along the way as well. Wanted to share an example of a client we work with, American Highway, in the concrete paving industry, Dalbar manufacturer. And they, this is their declaration of intent to their customers earlier this year that they want to be carbon neutral by 2050. They weaved in their different stakeholders, including, PCAs, roadmap, et cetera, pulling in EPDs. I talk about Buy America, which you can see here. So an example of what a declaration of intent may look like. Getting started, the key is to also look at who the owner of the messaging is. This is not something that's just housed by HR, if you will. Even diversity, equity, inclusion, we know from years of those organizations that do it right, it has to go beyond the HR seat. There's a function that relates to every aspect of the organization. So your industry associations, HR, marketing, safety, compliance, your internal committee, board of directors, et cetera. So keep that in mind, what the different stakeholders would be a part of it. And then making sure that you also consider your employees. A lot of times, employees are left out as an audience, and that can really catch an organization off guard because the intent of communication efforts is so focused on the external communication, they forget to bring the employees along. And that may be the case in terms of just bringing your local membership along too, and helping them understand what it is you're sharing and who you're sharing it to. And they become your advocates. So you really want to arm your employees, arm your membership with the content that you are sharing. And then the consumers, marketplace, how do you share information related to sustainability? Maybe it's an annual report, newsletter, social media, using third-party source to validate your claims. Again, so whatever you can do to share progress along things, but it is very much a journey. Nobody expects you to have everything figured out and all problems solved related to any of these challenges, right away. So navigating and communicating the data from ESG and other sustainability reporting. Key to make sure you do actually have something to report and something to communicate. And that may be even just sharing new information from other industry partners. Obviously, through ACI and through NEW, there's a lot of information coming out and great information that you can share with your other constituents as well. Know your audiences, determining the key message. Not all messages are one size fits all. Some may actually be more appropriate for your employees. Some may be for your customers or your clients. Maybe others are for other partners in the design build spectrum. So keep that in mind as well. And then reporting on data, be sure to be true to your own corporate values. Make sure that it's actually a fit for your organization. The things that are coming out of your mouth make sense. No need to comment on every single issue. If you think back to the slide where I shared the consumer and societal pressure right now for organizations to respond to societal issues, just because the pressure's there does not mean that your organization has to have a comment. Doesn't mean you have to have a statement about everything. So keep that in mind. If it's really not appropriate for the organization, for your chapter, for example, to come out with a stand on something, think really hard about whether or not you go down that path. And then keep employees and partners closely involved in the process. Where you should post your content. We get this question quite a bit. And the easy answer to it is to share your content where your audiences already play. So, for example, if you typically have the best success right now sharing information in e-blasts, continue down that path. If by all means try social media if you haven't already, or try some other ways and make sure that you're consistent in your messaging across all of the platforms. But if you really need to get your message out, and you've never used social media before, that's not the time to actually try with these messaging here. Make sure that you're doing your tried and true tactics as well. So with all of this information I've spewed at you, so first, I'm going to try and sum it all up into 10 tips with regards to communicating sustainability. And I'm happy to pass these slides on afterwards. There's a couple of slides that do a deep dive into some data and things like that I'm actually going to go through pretty quickly and skip over. If that's an area that interests you, again, you'll have the slide deck. So hopefully that's something you can dive into more, or I'm happy to have a further conversation. But the first tip is to have a plan. And I know that sounds obvious, but can tell you, being in this industry for 25 years, more often than not, we just jump in. We're problem solvers. We know there's a challenge, whether it's a design problem or a design challenge, et cetera, we dive in. We need to pause and actually say, who are our audiences? What are the messages that we're trying to get across? What's the problem we're trying to solve? So take the time for that planning effort related to sustainability, related to resiliency, related to DE&I. Otherwise, it can be actually pretty troublesome as you start getting some things out there that maybe aren't well thought out, or they're disjointed, with other efforts that you're doing. And that's a nice segue to being true to your brand. So even though these topics or sustainability and resiliency and DEI may be new to things that you are communicating from your organization, they should still fit with your brand and the brand story that you tell. If something seems really just kind of out of whack, it won't be transparent and won't be believable, if you will. And a lot of organizations learned that lesson during the pandemic when they were, sharing things or stating things that just didn't fit their culture. And now is not the time to try and change your culture either in terms of a public way. So make sure that the messaging that you do, pump out really does fit your brand and your brand narrative. Here's a great example of this. So as we all know, Heidelberg Materials, Lehigh Hansen, and 17 different brands that flow up under Lehigh changed their name to Heidelberg Materials January 1. We had the honor to be able to work with them in terms of this brand relaunch. But you can see here with their platform and programs related to sustainability and their name change, they weaved everything together and it was still very much on brand for them. So they talked about sustainability. They kept everything true to their brand. Nothing looked different or out of place, if you will. So really great example, and hats off to them for their efforts. Tip number 3 is to keep it simple. Sustainability can be very complex and abstract. So the more that you can actually make the messages that you're putting together understandable by all your audiences and something that's really relatable is really key. So resisting temptation to conclude every piece of information. Education's okay. Don't throw around words that nobody knows, or maybe only, a technical audience would understand, and avoiding that kitchen sink mentality. One of the examples that I like to share with this is, to kind of take a step back, think about during the pandemic and those early days where you got an email from anyone you'd ever done business with and they told you how to wash your hands. Well, we all got really tired of that. And it was kind of funny, you'd get an email from your dry cleaner and they would tell you how the proper way to wash your hands, etc. Well, same here with sustainability. We don't need to explain every detail. You don't need to explain carbon footprint and what all these things mean. Assume a certain level of understanding with your audience and then really share the you part of it. Here's a really great example, Slag Cement Association. You can see their sustainability messaging, very, very clean, very true to their brand, committed to a greener future, durable, resilient, sustainable. Number 4, keep it relatable. So make your stories succinct and make them personal. So, using people. The more you can have your employees, your members actually telling these stories, delivering these messages, the better. We all love stories right now. We all know we get a lot of our information from TikTok or for YouTube or how-to type videos. So the more that we can actually personalize and humanize things, the better. Great example here. This is from VCNA, St. Mary's Cement, Prairie, subsidiaries. And this is their ESG, or their corporate social responsibility reporting. A lot of information here. We had the benefit of working with them on this report, but you can see the use of people. Your eye immediately goes to the people and what they're sharing here. So hats off to them for really living true to their brand and then the messaging that they're getting out. Tip number 5 is to make it visual. So a lot of complex sustainability ideas, different programs that you may be involved in. So the more that we can actually share information in infographics and in different ways to make it easier instead of just pages and pages of text, the better. But doing so in a way that is not cliche. So try and go beyond green, try and go beyond the hands holding earth. We've all seen quite a bit of the earth logo and it green, etc. So look for ways where you can actually build on things that don't go, oh yeah, that's same old thing, same old thing. Some of these graphics I've seen in a lot of different organizations, so that tells you a lot right there. So go beyond earth from space, a close-up of the recycling logo, etc. And then also really clearly look at what your visuals are and, whether or not they're actually effective in delivering your messaging. So if you're doing ESG reporting, if you're doing a lot of reporting in an annual report related to sustainability, your carbon footprint, your recycling programs, maybe your diversity, equity, inclusion programs, take a look at the charts that you're including. Do they actually share what you want to share, or are they just a lot? Are they busy? And the pie chart is a perfect example here. Ron Berg, who just retired as executive vice president of ACI, I'm sure many of you know Ron, he thought pie charts were evil because they are. The studies actually show most people's brain can't discern. Look at that pie chart right here. And it's pretty common to see pie charts like this. It's hard to read, and our brain has a hard time discerning the different colors and the slices. And we're trying to figure out, is that 2%, is that 10%, et cetera. So really looking at, are there better ways to show things? So here's some good examples right here with pie charts. Fewer slices, the better. Use 5 sections or less. Pie slices should be discernible and different in size. Also not using 3D pie charts. So again, couple of examples of ways that you can improve your visuals. And then looking at horizontal and vertical bar charts as well. You can see the content that is shown here. That is better visuals in terms of sharing information. Very clean. The eye can quickly look at it and discern and interpret the information. Other things, the power of simple text. These are some infographics we've created for different clients. And you can see here, you can quickly look at it. A lot of information, but you can pull some key nuggets out of it. If you're interested and you want to dive into it more, you certainly can. But just in terms of like best practices, as a graphic designer, you learn our eyes typically, and this applies to newspapers as well. We look at something and our eyes typically go to the upper right corner, and our brain actually, for most people, will scan around to the bottom of the page and come back up. So many times they don't even see what's in the top left until it comes all the way around. Not true for everybody, but most people, that's how your brains actually pull in the information. So take a look at the graphics that you're sharing and the content. Other things in terms of, sharing information, looking at numbers, where does your mind go to? We've all played with these kind of games too. So looking and seeing where you can actually be a little bit more discernible in terms of the content you're sharing. Pre-attentive attributes and graphs, and I'm almost done with this section, so bear with me. I'm trying to go through this area fast. If you have a more interest in it, feel free to dive back in when you get the slides. But, this graph is pretty busy in terms of looking at it. Here's a much better way. Just by reorganizing it, the brain's able to actually take away. So if you look at the difference here, trying to make sense of this, and then just by rearranging the information, that really helps the brain out. And then finally, a talk about color. We've already talked a little bit about sustainable doesn't always mean green. What are some other colors that you can show, that you can bring in, that bring in different levels of emotion? And we don't typically talk about emotion when we talk about marketing, when we talk about concrete, but it's okay if we actually think of things when we are communicating in terms of emotion. What's the emotion that you want to bring in terms of connection with what your messaging is? And then, of course, eliminating distractions. So you can see here, ask yourself when you just look at this, is there anything that you would eliminate? A lot of detail on here, and I'll give you just a second for your brain to peek at this. So unnecessary precision here, redundant information, a lot of clutter. And again, just a lot cleaner way to actually share this information. So that was a deep dive into graphics. Certainly key element of what we're communicating, especially since when you're communicating related to sustainability and DEI, you may be communicating to different audiences than you have in the past. Maybe you're typically your typical communication channels are with clients. Maybe it's testing results, etc. And you're now communicating with a whole different group of people. So really being very having the forthright thought and fortitude to actually sit down and come back to that planning. Knowing your audience, don't apply one size approach to all, outlining key messages for each persona. And I'll show you an example of this. This is something that we've done with American Concrete Pavement Association in terms of looking at who are the people that we need to get in front of. Taxpayer Tom, engineer Ed. We have this built out in terms of politicians at different levels, whether it's at the State House, whether it's FHWA, different DOT officials, consulting engineer, different members of the team, understanding how they present themselves, what they care about, what their pain points are, what are key messages that are really more appropriate to them. Of course, you have to be really careful when you use personas because you are making some generalizations and putting people into categories, but it does allow you to take a step back and try and really understand your audiences. Great way to develop these is through focus groups and really just spending time listening to your different audiences. Tip number 7 is telling the truth. So sustainability is a journey and honesty really goes a long way. If you think of the organizations that have made any sort of declarations or announcements related to sustainability, diversity, equity, inclusion, they are able to declare where they're at and be very honest and transparent about where they're going and where they want to go. Doesn't mean you have to harp on the negatives. It doesn't mean you have to air your dirty laundry in any ways, but being very authentic in terms of where you are and where you're trying to move to really helps. Being careful, obviously, not to pad your efforts, not to make any sort of overstatements, if you will, because if you're found not to be truthful, it's really hard to build that transparency back and build that trust back. Sharing obstacles you've encountered along the way. Again, that helps build trust. So everyone knows that no one's been doing all the things right, and we're trying to improve our environmental impact. So whatever you can do to be transparent here is key. Be engaging. Tip number 8, creating connections and engaging, selling the positive, not using catastrophe or scare tactics. The world's falling apart if we don't do this, etc. What can you do to actually build, positivity and being engaging? And here's some examples. For the most part, our industry doesn't actually communicate with end users and owners all that much. We typically communicate more with other members of the design and construction team. But here's a good example, again, from the Coalition for Responsible Roads, so concrete pavements, actually communicating to the traveling public and helping them understand, not with scare tactics, but just the importance of concrete roads, concrete pavements, environment, a different way of being a little bit more uplifting and inviting. Number 9 is being different, not emulating others, create active engagement that's unique. I love this example from DOCA. There's several things that are tied up in this Instagram post that they have here. Number 1, it's a declaration in terms of their announcement on the way to net zero. So this is their declaration of intent in terms of their sustainability programs. And then you see here, it's actually very true to their brand. So they are announcing their programs. They are sharing a highlight and an update of where they are. They're pretty unique. They are a little different in terms of how they're actually sharing this and being pretty bold about it, but it's also very on point with their brand. So a lot of great examples if you follow Doka, and they're an ACI member and really leading the way in some of these efforts. And then number 10, believe it or not, it may seem a little weird, but not overusing the word sustainable. So studies have been done in terms of effective language, and those organizations that write these papers and all they talk about and every word is sustainable, sustainability, sustainable. It lost a lot in terms of transparency and in authenticity. If you are able to communicate about your programs, and this would apply to diversity, equity, inclusion too, without having to throw sustainable or DE&I in over and over and over again, it actually really helps build in your messaging, in the credibility, in the transparency, if you will. So that one may be a little surprising, but if you take a step back and think about it, if you're really telling your story, you should be able to tell it with the actions and the things that you're doing, not just using the labels, if you will. So in summary, tips for sharing successfully, communicating about sustainability. Can't stress enough that sustainable piece has equity, resiliency, longevity, all of the things that we know to be true in the concrete industry and what are hallmarks of success, since Roman times, if you will. So we have a really good story to tell here. But key is actually having a strategy, having a plan, understanding your audiences, understanding your messaging. Show a presence. We tend to be, as an industry, conservative in many cases. And of course, with technical expertise, we often want to wait until we have all the answers figured out before we dive into sharing or making a declaration. Don't wait. You don't have to have all the information. You should plan. You should spend some time thinking some things through, but don't wait till you have everything figured out. Be very visual. And then again, be very true to your brand, which is really key as well. So with that, about 40 minutes in, I'm going to actually stop sharing and then just come on camera and invite anybody that has any questions. I'd be happy to spend some time talking through anything that you may have. And John, I see you joined us as well. So I don't know if there's anything that you want to add to the conversation. Or maybe that's your avatar. I don't know.
Well, I do want to say thank you, Kimberly. That was a lot of information to digest and very good information. It looks like we don't have any questions right now, but I do want to let everyone know. So we'll give them some time if they do have questions. I want to let everyone know that our next webinar will be on October the 11th at 12 p.m. Eastern. We'll have a consultant with Star Chapter available helping us to navigate through the Star Chapter platform. As many of you probably know, we have some new requirements for the local member program, so he'll assist us with that.
Fantastic.
And it looks like we do have a question that came in. Hi, Kimberly, excellent presentation. How do you deal with people who doesn't have enough knowledge in sustainability? What words you should use to not fall into greenwashing?
That's a great question. So I think the best way to handle that is to really talk more about your programs and the things you're doing. So again, instead of just declaring sustainability, we're now a sustainable company, but talk about the efforts that you're taking, the things that you're doing, maybe how you're using, water differently in production, maybe how you're really working towards limiting the transportation factor of your products and your supplies, et cetera. So talking a lot about the steps you have in place and what your action plan is will help. So it's not greenwashing. Great question.
Thank you. Any others?
It says, when's this chapter webinar? Yeah, if you want to send that out.
October the 11th at 12 p.m. Eastern, and you will see some email blasts coming out as well in our e-news and as well as some email blast from myself.
And then I will stress once again, if anyone has any questions, Denisha can send out my contact information. Happy to review anything with any of you, and wish you the best of luck as you enter another season of chapters and programming, etc.
Well, I want to say personally, thank you, Kimberly. I know that you're very busy, so we do appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to present to our chapters. So thank you. I also want to thank our chapter officers and directors for joining us today. Hopefully, you all have learned something valuable that you can apply to your company or your chapter. I know I sure learned a lot today, and I hope that everyone has a great day. And this will
Wonderful.
conclude today's webinar session. Thank you
Wonderful.
all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kimberly.
Yeah, thanks,
Bye.
John.
Bye.